Kidderminster, famous throughout the world for its innovation in the carpet industry. St Mary and All Saints Parish Church has long been the centre of this industrial town, witnessing to Christian endeavour down the centuries. This was the setting for Richard Baxter to preach his reforming message in the 17th century. Today, it offers an oasis of calm, in contrast to the rapidly changing modern townscape of supermarkets, car parks and bustling roads. Some of the town centre's old industrial sites are now giving way to new homes, and once again people are living within earshot of St Mary's bells. St Mary and All Saints Kidderminster has its origins in the 12th century, with much of the current building dating from the 15th century. The tower itself was renovated in 1893 and again in the 1980s. Since this time, major work has been undertaken. The internal fabric of the building, the furnishings and the organ have been renovated, further enhancing this magnificent church.
There have been bells at St Mary's since medieval times, since at least the 15th century. The oldest bells that we currently have date from 1754 and were cast by Abel Ruddle of Gloucester. Interestingly, the bells themselves probably weren't cast for St Mary's Kidderminster. The only bell that we know for certain that was cast for St Mary's is the present day fifth, which has the name of Lord Foley on it. And Lord Foley was a major industrialist in the 18th century and was responsible for the development of much of the town. Of the original 8 bells cast by Abel Ruddle, only 6 now remain. 2 of them were recast during the 19th century, and one of those 2 is the present-day Tenor, which weighs 1¼ tons. It was cast by Mears of London in the mid-19th century. Unfortunately, the mid-19th century has a reputation as having been one of the worst periods, if not the worst period, in English bell founding history. There are altogether 12 bells at St Mary's. 6 of them, the oldest 6, date from 1754. The 2 heaviest bells, the 11th and 12th of the peal, were recast in the mid-19th century. There's also 3 Gillett and Johnson trebles, which were cast in 1935, when the peal, or the set of bells, was increased from 8 to 12. This was something quite special. There weren't that many rings of 12 in the country. Unfortunately, it was a job that was done somewhat on the cheap. Rather than casting a complete new set of bells, which would have been the best way to create a good quality musical instrument, 3 new trebles were added, and then they took a clock bell and added it in the middle. The effect was unfortunate. The 8 bells that existed prior to 1935 didn't have a particularly good reputation. The 12 bells after 1935 had a terrible reputation. It was said at the time of the augmentation that the bells at Kidderminster were a rotten 8 ruined. A number of the bells are showing signs of their age, and that's particularly the case for the 6 Ruddle bells. They are particularly porous. As a result, you can see from the rim of the bell pock marks, holes. That has a detrimental effect on the quality of the sound of the bells. In the 1950s, clock hammers were added to the bells so that hymn tunes could be played on them. And unfortunately, some of the hammers were working on a particularly porous section of one of those bells, the 9th bell. In effect, what this means is that when the hammers were added, they began to work on an area that was already weakened because of the holes that were in it. And what's happened is that since then, quite a large hole has opened up. The frame that the bells sit in is also a cause for some concern. The number of bells was increased from 8 to 12 in 1935. There wasn't quite enough room in the bell chamber to fit 12 bells in using a conventional wooden frame. And what they did was they made the frame partly out of metal and partly out of wood. But the way in which that new frame was installed, the way in which it was joined to the wall, was such that there was some potential for damage to the structure of the tower itself. And in fact, it's already been argued that were the tower here at St Mary's not of such outstanding quality, that the action of that frame hammering against the wall could have caused very, very serious structural damage. It's not a problem that means that the bells cannot be rung, but when you take all these problems collectively, they form a big problem, a problem that needs to be addressed. The bells of St Mary's have always played a part in the life of the town, as well as in the ministry of the church. Even to this day, they're still rung to celebrate important events in the life of the town, but they also have a national significance. They are rung to celebrate national events. The bells were rung in sympathy for the victims of the terrorist atrocities in America on September the 11th, 2001. Closer to home, they were rung in sympathy with the farmers of this country who suffered during the foot and mouth outbreak of the same year. But the bells also have a perhaps even more important role to play as part of the ministry of the church. They are, quite simply, the loudest voice, literally, that the church has in the town. The bells are a reminder that the music of the bells, like God's love, is free to any who care to listen. There are two basic aims to this project. On the one hand, to recast, to replace all 12 of the existing bells. The only way to produce a quality set of bells is to produce them as a set, a complete new peal of bells. The bells themselves also need to be hung in a new frame. The existing frame just isn't really suitable for the task. But what we're also trying to do is use this as an opportunity. A chance to reach out to the local community, a chance to get people interested in bells, in bell ringing, in history, the history of the town, the history of the church, the history of the tower, but also to get people interested in the church. It's to encourage people to see St Mary's as part of the town. It has been throughout its history, and that role is as important, if not more important, today than it has ever been.
Ring for the Future was launched at Easter 2002, and since then a small committee has been working to keep the project in the public eye. Events have been arranged to keep the money coming in, and letters have been sent to various suitable organisations, with some success. Many groups and individuals in the community have shown tremendous interest and have made generous contributions. Pupils and staff of Sladen Church of England Middle School placed a carboy in the entrance to the school and filled it with their spare pocket money. Mr. Singh, the Hercote Road postmaster, helped by placing a jar on his counter to collect small change. Thieves very nearly wrecked the efforts of the school children by trying to steal the carboy, which broke, scattering coins all over the entrance hall. Undaunted, another carboy was found.
I see that you overcome what would have been an handicap to a lot of people and have continued.
The good works continued, until a cheque for over £1,100 was handed to the ringing master, Chris Stewart, in the presence of the mayor at a special school assembly.
I'm lost for words, but I'm not far off this morning. When Canon Bell told me that you were raising money, I never could have imagined that you would have been as successful as this and raised as much money as this.
Since then, the carboy is still being filled. Because of the interest shown by the school, 2 children have started to learn the art of bell ringing. Amazingly quickly the fund grew until by spring 2003, only 12 months from the launch, the committee felt confident enough to seek the approval of the Church Council to obtain tenders from contractors and then apply to the diocese for a faculty. The first major boost to fundraising came when the Worcestershire and District Change Ringing Association offered to sponsor the new tenor bell. The Mayor of Kidderminster appealed to industry in the town. As a result, by early 2003, all 13 bells had funding. Other small contributions swelled the funds by buying bell ropes and other pieces of equipment. Analysis of the tenders from a number of contractors allowed an accurate costing to be established for the various elements of the works proposed. A contractor was selected, and this decision was included in the submission to the diocese. The Diocesan Advisory Committee sent experts to inspect the tower, and the church's architect, Ron Sims, was also consulted on the detailed proposals. In June, the faculty was granted, and negotiations with the preferred contractor were concluded. July, and with £17,000 still to raise, a contract was signed for the work which had funding. The contract was awarded to Arthur Berry, with the casting of the bells and the fabrication of the new frame being subcontracted to John Taylor of Loughborough. 3 casting dates for the bells were agreed in August and early September. It was hoped that the work would be completed by early 2004.
Thank you very much. The project is going to be great.
Yeah, super
Well
job.
done, Chris.
Super job. Yeah.
Smashing.
Midsummer 2003, the contractor moved into the tower and started work dismantling the clock and chiming mechanisms to clear the access hatches through which the bells would have to pass on their way to the floor of the church, some 60 feet below. Working with heavy bells in such a confined space required the use of various pieces of lifting equipment and an electric hoist.
What we're going to do, it looks as though we can actually take that piece of frame out.
Oh, right.
And then it just comes over.
Special lighting had to be installed and a 3-phase electrical supply provided for the hoist. Safety was a major consideration, and the tower was placed under the sole control of the contractor for the duration of the work. The area in the church under the tower was also roped off whenever it was necessary to use the access hatch. Amazingly quickly, the bells and their fittings were released from the frame, where they had been for nearly 70 years. And the process began to lower them down through the 3 hatches, only just large enough for the tenor bell. Each bell was lowered on the electric hoist, with the access hatch being opened to allow it to pass through and then closed again for safety. On clearing the hatch, it was a free drop onto the waiting trolley, which then placed each bell at the back of the church for everyone to take a last look. On several occasions, a small audience gathered to witness the historic event. Including some children from Sladen Church of England Middle School, who had done so much to help with the fundraising. The tenor was the last one of the bells to be lowered, and as you can see, it was a tight fit through the hatch. Below, the tower captain, Chris Stewart, watched anxiously. A large number of visitors came to see the old bells before they departed, and many photographs were taken. The press also published articles and pictures. It's comforting to know that 7 of the old bells were found new homes, one even going to Australia. The old 5th, bearing Lord Foley's name, is to be rehung in the tower as a service bell. This only leaves 4, the largest, to be recycled by the bell foundry. The first of the bells to leave St Mary's were loaded onto a lorry on the 23rd of July, under the excited gaze of some youngsters who'd come to see the bells leave. Some of the bells had been here for 250 years. Others watching had mixed feelings on the departure, as in some cases they had known and rung the bells for many years, and now St Mary's had no bells at all. People in the town were also beginning to miss the familiar sound of the clock striking the hours, and the hymn tunes being played every 3 hours. Now that the tower chamber was clear of bells, the lower timber bell frame could be dismantled. The upper frame could then be used as a temporary work platform and as a support for the hoist. The tower was now strangely quiet and empty, with the sound of the old bells just a distant memory. Gradually the chamber was cleared. All the large timbers had to be lowered vertically through the hatches to the ground and then taken away. English heritage had indicated that the unique cast iron side frames bolted to the walls should remain as a memento of the measures that were taken to fit the old frame into the space available. A close inspection of the tower roof timbers was undertaken by the church's architect, Ron Sims. Fortunately, no serious deterioration was found, but the opportunity was taken to arrange for the contractor to treat the timber and to clean decades of grime from the walls of the chamber. Repairs to the lead roof on the tower were also carried out to stop the water ingress, which had become a problem. Starting in August, several coach trips were organised by the tower captain, so that anyone who was interested could visit John Taylor's bell foundry at Loughborough to see the new bells being cast. Each outing included a conducted tour of the works and the bell museum and a chance to see a number of bells actually being cast. The museum has a fascinating display of bell making skills down the ages. An interesting talk was given on the theory of how a bell is made so that it makes the required sound.
Go behind the didgeridoo and they make a lovely musical sound.
John Taylor's family tree shows how his family became part of this ancient tradition. Walking through the factory, the new bell frame could be seen being fabricated and assembled to ensure that it would fit correctly in the tower. Tuning of bells is a very special skill. On later visits, some of the bells already cast were seen here waiting tuning and finishing. Metal is very gradually removed from the inside of the bell until the desired sound characteristics are achieved. Which nowadays relies on electronic equipment and a huge vertical lathe, as well as the skill of the operator. Bells are cast in steel moulds lined with special clay, with clay cores forming the bell mouth. The casting takes place with the mould buried in the sand in the floor of the casting shed, so that the metal cools slowly. Taylor's casting shed has a viewing platform at one end which allows visitors to watch in safety as the furnaces heat the special metal. Various treatments are added to the mix, including stirring with a willow branch, a traditional method of reducing oxidation.
So it's starting from bone cold,
afternoon in the summer it's warm up a little bit, it's like a bit of water.
The furnace is tapped at the required temperature.
Fresh from ice cold at about 9 o'clock in the morning.
Right, it's taken a week to get this far.
And the
so
mould's
you
filled.
might like to find how long it takes to cast it. There you go.
The molten metal is then stirred to feed the mould to ensure it is full. The bell is then left to cool slowly for several days.
They'll do that for about 10 or 15 minutes, something like that, until the mould is definitely full.
The ringers in the party were treated to a ring on Taylor's own peal of bells, installed in the tower at the factory. This was particularly welcomed by St Mary's ringers, who are having to travel to other towers to practice while the work proceeds. Taylor's bells could only just be heard at street level. This demonstrated how sound control can be used to reduce the noise level of the bells. At St Mary's, doors are to be fitted to the tower louvers so that the spread of sound can be adjusted. There was excitement in St Mary's on the 11th of November when the first sections of the bell frame arrived. During the summer, the contractor prepared for this by installing 2 new lifting beams high in the tower. These would be a permanent fixture that would be used to lift the new frame and the bells into place, and in the future would assist in moving heavy items for maintenance. Large openings had been cut in the tower wall's inner skin, so that the new bell frame horizontal girders could be concreted in. Finally, the remainder of the old timber upper bell frame had been removed, as it was no longer useful as a working platform. The new frame was laid out at the rear of the church, and some initial painting was done. The frame parts had now to be lifted 80 feet to their position in the bell chamber. This required some careful manoeuvring through the 3 hatches, using the hoists attached to the new lifting beams.
Say stop, I'll say cut.
What do you catch in the flash?
Whoa!
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, I've got it. Okay.
At Taylor's foundry, the whole frame was bolted together in a trial assembly. The value of this was proved, as almost everything fitted together without a hitch. No small task given the restricted access and the working area. But with the skill of the contractor, installation progressed quickly. The design of the frame allowed for the pit for the new tenor bell to be directly over the access hatch. This allowed clear access through the bottom frame for the lifting of the upper frame members and bells. Once some of the horizontal frame members had been erected, the cast iron frames that support the bells could be installed between them. The new frame grew quickly once the lower girders were assembled. The top horizontal girders were soon in place, and fitting of the new cast iron frames for the lower bells could now be completed. The supports for the new bearings could now be seen awaiting their bells. When the main frame members were fully installed, they were given a final coat of paint and concreted in the pockets in the walls. The tower was now even stronger than before, as steel girders at 2 levels tied the walls together. The top frame cast iron sections were now added, in a particular order, which would allow for the lifting of the top bells. 21st of November. It was just after dawn on a cold, dismal Friday, and a small group stood expectantly outside St Mary's to watch as the first 9 bells of the new peal were delivered. Unloading followed, and the bells were trolleyed into the church. Sometimes helped by the spectators. The bells were arranged in order of size at the rear of the nave, and many people came to view them. On Sunday the bells were blessed by the rector, before a congregation swelled by families and organisations who had sponsored the purchase of the bells.
These bells we dedicate in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
3 more bells and their fittings were delivered on the 4th of December, and the flat 6th arrived on the 11th of December to complete the peal. The new tenor bell was unloaded and struck for the first time at St Mary's. The spectators posed for a photograph with the tenor bell as it entered the church. These bells were also blessed over the weekend of the 13th of December. We now had a full peal of new bells. All that remained was to install them and fit them out. We will follow the bell dedicated to the town of Kidderminster as it journeys to its place in the tower.
Okay.
The 2-ton hoist lifted the town bell, weighing just half a ton with ease. It was gently guided through the hatch and continued on its way up through the ringing chamber, then the clock chamber,
Is that another?
until it emerged in the bell chamber.
That it? Good eye, I don't get this. Okay. Great stuff.
Here it had to be lifted right through the lower frame and up to very nearly the top of the tower, so that it could clear the top frame and be lowered into place. Manoeuvring into its pit was done by using mechanical hoists arranged so that the bell could be slewed into its final position. The bolt holes had to be aligned and the bearings finally bolted down. The order in which the bells were lifted into place depended on the position they were to occupy in the frame. Those in the lower frame had to be dropped into place from above.
I'll give you part of your rod. Thank you. I'll wrap that flush on there. As long as we can, yeah? So, I think the thing now, we just concentrate on 4 and 5. I'll get these blocks.
The smaller bells were hung quickly, and soon the tower began to look quite full again.
I'll just lift it
Yeah,
up.
okay.
I'll just pull it up for hand.
Yeah.
Might go on.
The larger bells had first to be supported on timbers so that the headstocks could be fitted, as headstock and bell together were too large to pass through all the hatches. The last bell to be hung was the tenor. A small group of sightseers gathered for the occasion as the tenor bell was hoisted into place. this bell was directly over the hatch to make the handling of the largest bell, weighing 1¼ tons, as easy as possible. For a while it was supported on timber bearers, just clear of the hatch, so that the hoist could be used to lift materials up into the tower. Christmas 2003, and St Mary's now had 13 new bells, and one ancient bell in its tower, and fitting out could at last begin. With all of the bells hung in the frame, it was time to fit the rope wheels, stays and sliders. Each one in turn was inverted to check that it ran smoothly on its bearings.
Should be alright.
Once satisfied that the bell rang smoothly, it was time to fit the rope guides, bell ropes and finally the clappers.
Well, these H's make a big difference. They give you a lot more leeway.
Yeah, they have. Fantastic. It looks lovely. Each bell's rope has to find its way into the ringing chamber by the most direct route, avoiding the use of too many pulleys and guides. The ropes from the bells on the top frame run through tubes until they appear in the clock room.
Yeah, I can soon remove it.
And then run through special eyes in the ringing chamber ceiling.
I'll get those in a minute.
I'll get those as well in a minute.
While this was going on, the clock specialist reconnected the clock hands, and once again the town could tell the time. Everything was now ready for the exciting test ring.
Look to. Trouble's going. She's gone.
Yvonne Granger led St Mary's ringers in a test using 6 of the middle bells. Among the ringers was Chris Stewart, who had inspired and nurtured the project from the start.
Trouble's going. She's gone.
It was then the turn of Pauline Taylor to start the ringing of the whole peal of 12. The test was successful and everyone was delighted with the music of the new bells. Helen Priest, the new ringing master, now faces the task of training St Mary's ringers to use the new bells and managing the many requests to ring expected from other towers.
Blessing to all who ring and all who hear. May all respond to the call to worship and to give their lives to the service of your kingdom. May this town be blessed by your grace, abounding in a just and generous spirit. In the faith of Jesus Christ, we dedicate these bells to the glory of God and in thanksgiving for our mothers in the faith, for Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Deborah, Ruth, Hannah, Esther, Elizabeth, Anna, Martha, Mary Magdalene, Lydia, and our Blessed Lady Mary, Mother of our Lord Jesus Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Look to. Treble's going. She's gone.
The dedication took place during the normal Sunday morning Eucharist. Slaton Middle School Choir took an active part in the service, and a number of presentations were made, not least to Chris Stewart, who masterminded the project from the start.
Thank you for all the school has done.
Chris has been the loudest voice of the bells. I would like Chris to accept a gift.
The ringing master, Helen Priest, received a plaque from Taylors, the bell founders, detailing the peal, which will be hung in the ringing room.
A job really well done. Let's thank Taylor.
Listen now to the music of the bells and compare the old with the new. Wonderful sound of St Mary's new peal of bells ringing out over Kidderminster, we approach the end of the project. It's been a test of nerve and commitment, but has been so generously supported by the people of the town. There are several items of work still to be completed. The chimes and hymn player are to be replaced in a modern form. The bell ringers are learning to master the new peal, to the delight of all who hear them. The old bells were not very tuneful, and many were odd struck. They had a long history of being changed and augmented, which did little to improve them. The new peal is a musical instrument, finely tuned and adjusted, giving greater flexibility for ringing various combinations of bells. The bells will gain a reputation for being a fine peal, worthy of this great church. They will again be the loudest voice of the church for centuries to come.